Hi, and welcome to Dani After Dark. If you're new here, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss a notification or a new episode. Tonight is the Dani After Dark book club, and we are doing the October book that was voted on. And that book was a follow-up from the book that we did last month in September. So remember, last month we did Trapped with Miss Arias Part 1. This month, we did Trapped with Miss Arias Parts 2 and 3, My Final Words by Kirk Nurmi. So parts 2 and 3 are one book. So just in case anybody is not familiar, that's what we will be reviewing tonight. And I'm really excited to review this book. I have a lot of notes. But as I was going through them earlier today, a part of me was like, oh my gosh, I have so much to discuss. But I also felt like there's still so much that the book offers that I am not even scratching the surface of that. Or, some of my notes will touch upon like just the beginning of something that Kirk is describing, but then the reader will get so much more from that, kind of as I go through my review. So on the one hand, I have a lot to discuss, but there's still so much in this book. I mean, I guess you can probably tell by my tone. It was a really, really well-written book from content and structure-wise, because y'all know I am very picky when it comes to structure of a book. I'm so picky, but it was flawless. So before I get into that, I actually have a little treat for everybody. So if you guys missed oh gosh, it was several months ago now that I was on Zone 7 podcast, which is Cheryl McCullum's podcast. I was on it about the Karen retrial, and Cheryl had a panel, and there were several people along that besides me and Cheryl. And one of the people that was on there was Kirk Nurmi, which I was beyond honored to be a part of that panel. But Kirk was on there. So I made sure to tag him each time that we did this review of his books, just so that he knew that we were doing that for book club. And I have a message from him that he wanted me to relay to everybody for tonight. And I know that, and I do have the link here, so if anybody read the book and wants to come on camera and do a review with me, by all means, please feel free to do so. But I also understand that not everybody's comfortable with coming on camera, so some people kind of just watch behind the scenes and kind of see what my takeaway is versus, their takeaway. Or some people will not be involved in the chat end of YouTube and then, kind of message with me after. So regardless, if you've read this book and you're going to be partaking in this, or if you haven't read it yet and you're waiting to kind of see the review that I give of it and, let that make your decision whether to purchase it or not, which go ahead, get the books. But I do have a message from Kirk that he asked me to share. So he says, if you would be so kind, could you please express my gratitude to everyone in your audience that took the time to read my books. I am truly honored. So that is just, I think, absolutely amazing. And shout out to Kirk. Thank you. Thank you for on the one hand, I want to say, I wish you never had to write these books. Like, I really wish you never had to write them. But both books are just such great reads. And this one is a very different type of read than the first. And I will get into that with the review. So I do see people coming into the chat. Again, if you have read this book or you have any kind of comments along the way, please feel free to put that in the chat. So as I typically do, the back of the book gives a description of what the reader can expect with this book. So what it says, and of course I typed it out here, is that Kirk rose to international prominence as the lead counsel for the infamous Jodi Arias. The stress of that case brought cancer into his life. And with cancer came big changes, a whole new life. A life wherein happiness is his beacon. With this beacon in view, Kirk has written for the New York Daily News, authored 5 books, has spoken all around the country, and in April of 2020 will debut his new one-man show, Overcoming Jodi Arias. Kirk has also appeared on Crime Stories with Nancy Grace, Court TV, The Mel Robbins Show, The Today Show, and has been featured in documentaries on Discovery ID and Oxygen Network. Yet, his most important work is as a personal assistant to his wife of 26 years and his 4-pound Chihuahua. So, based on some of the things that it talks about in this, you can tell that this was written prior to COVID, where it says, his upcoming one-man show, right? So just so everybody is aware of the time frame. So this book was written several years after the first book. So it was written in 2020 itself, which we all know COVID shut the world down that year, but that's when this did come out. And we will touch upon some of the things that he talks about here in this. I will say the description on the back, it kind of, my only thing is the book talks a lot about the case and then afterwards, and the back cover kind of, I think, focuses a bit more on the afterwards of the case. But then again, most people, I'm guessing, who are reading this book are familiar with the Jodi Arias case. So my only thought was, if somebody for some reason wasn't knowledgeable about this case and read the back cover, I think they wouldn't necessarily pick up that he's going to be really talking about the trial and all of the aftermath with that, in addition to kind of his life outside of the case after the trial ended. So that was my one note of, I wish that was a little more referenced in the back cover, but other than that, completely spot on. And my favorite line of that book, just because I am a pet person, as y'all know, was that his most important work was, again, his wife of 26 years at the time he wrote this, which is amazing, amazing. And to his Chihuahua. I love that. Love when people are just such pet people. So, but that's just my little side note. So the book itself, 320 pages. I feel like it doesn't look like that on camera, but it is 320 pages. Again, published in 2020. There are 57 chapters and no pictures in this book. As you might recall, last month when we did part 1, there was no pictures in there as well. I am very actually grateful that Kirk made that artistic choice to not put any pictures in this book or the previous one. There's no need for it in regards to putting pictures of Jodi. We've seen and heard plenty of her, or pictures of Travis, or even pictures from the trial, from court. There's no pictures in there. And I think that really just leaves the reader strictly to the content of what Kirk is saying, and not kind of going back to the salaciousness of the photos from the trial. And, we've seen tons and tons of photos of this case. So wasn't needed. And I'm really grateful that Kirk made that artistic choice not to put any photos in either book. So that is my note on that. So in regards to the acknowledgement section, I will say a lot of times when I am reading to do a review of an author's book and I go through the acknowledgement section, some of the times it is kind of just, and up to the author, right? Straight into who they are thanking and why they're writing this book. Just a very kind of more emotional and personal connection to those who helped with that process. And in some cases, you get a little bit of that, but also a lot of information as well. And I will say Kirk's was the one where you get not only just a little bit of personal perspective, but a lot of information where I'm like, the acknowledgement section could have easily been another chapter in itself. There was a lot of great information in that. And speaking to just even a lot of friends who read books and some of y'all who kind of read these along with me, I can see how some people might just kind of want to skip the acknowledgments or kind of like the after part of the book and just kind of get to the meat of the book and kind of start right away with chapter 1. In this book, you actually would be missing out if you did not read the acknowledgement section, because it kind of gives a lot of information where it sets you up for the first chapter of the book. So I would say make sure that you start there. And I have a quote from that part. Again, there's several pages of the acknowledgments, but one that really spoke to me was, quote, "For those not familiar, I published part 1 of the series while I was undergoing chemotherapy for stage 3 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and at a time when I had no idea if I was going to win my fight against this powerful disease. The sole intent of that book was to impose truth upon the plethora of lies Miss Arias had hurled in my direction in case I lost my battle with cancer. If death was going to come my way, I was determined not to let Miss Arias further stain my legacy by having her lies stand without retort." End quote. What a powerful, powerful statement. And with that being said, the book right there sets you up for chapter 1 and sets the tone of the book. The tone of this book of parts 2 and 3 is much different than part 1, because at this point he accomplished what he needed to in part 1, and now he's gone through the health things that he's gone through, and he's just giving this kind of, all right, let's really get to like the trial and whatnot and how this impacted me after. And on the one hand, and this was just my perspective, I felt the tone of this book was not as, I don't think apologetic isn't the right word, because that's not what I'm thinking. But in the first book that we reviewed last month, he really gave this, I can understand how the reader might feel this way, so let me explain. There was a lot of that. Where in here, no, he just gets straight to it and is like, let me break it down. It's almost like he didn't feel the need to kind of coddle the reader, like, okay, I know maybe you didn't agree, or you felt a certain type of way during the trial before, but let me walk you through this. He just, at book 2 or parts 2 and 3 here, he just is like, all right, let's just hit the ground running. And I liked that, because in one of the reviews that I gave last month of this book was, I was not one of those people who watched the trial and thought, okay, as the defense for Jodi Arias, he must agree with everything she's saying. Like, I never thought that way. And I don't understand how people can't separate the defense attorney doing their job for their client versus their client. It's 2 separate things. And I feel in some cases, and especially in this one, people kind of lumped those 2 together and could not separate it for the life of them. And reading his book last month, I was like thinking, I get why he was kind of saying to the reader, like, let me show you, like, let me explain. I, as a reader, was thinking, I don't need that explanation. I'm with you. I was with you back then. So to kind of see how this book, the tone has shifted where he doesn't do that, I was just so like, you got it, Kirk. You got this. Let's go. So just my 2 cents on that. He does give the same respectful names of the major players in this book in regards to, he never calls Travis. He calls him Mr. Alexander. We saw that in the last book. It is the same in this book. In regards to Jody, he also calls her Miss Arias. So that is still the same. In regards to my notes, I just kind of, for simplicity, will refer to Miss Arias as Jody and Mr. Alexander as Travis. So now that that is out of the way, the book dives right in, like literally right in, to Kirk being in the parking lot and walking into the courthouse. And everything was about to start. He says, quote, once in the courthouse, the customary return. That is until I exited the elevator that transported me to the 5th floor to see the masses, mostly reporters, waiting outside of the locked courtroom door. For that is when I knew the circus was truly in town and that I would soon be under the big top, end quote. So right away, he is hit with, this is going to be like the trial of trials. And again, he did not sign up for this. So what will come of that, again, we will get into. So Kirk then talks about the job of a juror, as well as the job of a juror in a death penalty case. And that is very important because there is a difference. He talks about what the jurors in a death penalty case will be seeing, the emotional pain that can bring on to a juror. And then he adds on to that when a case is public and scrutinized, it also brings scrutiny of a juror's decision. And we see that so much now with cases, right? So it's interesting in kind of hindsight to kind of re-look back at kind of Kirk's perspective of this as it was going to be unfolding. So he talks about the process of a juror being selected in a case like this, where it could take weeks to even months to get a jury for this type of trial. He talks about the different types of questionnaires that are thrown at the prospective jurors, as well as kind of scheduling, which is super important when you are picking a jury where the trial is going to last most likely months upon months upon months. So the opening statements of the case, what Kirk talked about was this gives the jury a preview of the evidence that they are about to hear. So that's why opening statements are so important in a trial. What the prosecution wants out of their opening statements is they want the juror to focus on nothing but the crime and the suffering of the victim, where the defense wants jurors to focus on the overall bigger picture, the client being either altogether innocent or are they guilty but of a lesser crime. Both sides usually have a hook during opening statements, and he describes it as a jingle that would stay with the jurors in their mind throughout the trial. So the prosecution, their hook was that Jody developed a plan in the days before the murder of Travis, where the defense's hook was that she was, quote, the dirty little secret, end quote, of Travis. So again, this was something that the defense wanted the jury to focus on, the entire relationship of Jody and Travis, not just those few days before the murder had occurred. So once the trial started, the media knew who Kirk was and wanted to talk to him. He talks about just like call after call of people wanting information. And he was very like, no, I wasn't going to do that. You can't do that. And the media wanted to make a name for themselves, and they wanted to insert themselves into Kirk's space. And I feel like that's pretty self-explanatory. We see that so much now, even with true crime cases. Kirk and his co-counsel would be followed. They would even be followed into the bathroom. And there are several stories about that in here. So basically what would be the point of that, right? Was people or the media were trying to get information from either Kirk or his co-counsel, basically when their guard was down and they might slip and maybe give some type of information, but never happened here. But needless to say, that's something that the media did try very hard in this case. So the state's case for guilt. So when the trial started, the way it works is and this is just kind of strategic, and you've seen this in so many trials. If you're into true crime and you're here, you already know how this works. But the prosecution, the state presents their case first. And then the defense can either present their side or not present. They do not have to present a thing, because remember, the burden of proof, it falls on the state and the prosecution to show we are here bringing these charges, these allegations against that individual. The burden of proof is for them to prove to the jury beyond a reasonable doubt that the person sitting at the defense table is guilty. So again, the state starts. So they first called Mimi Hall to the stand. She was a true Mormon through and through. She followed all of the rules of that religion. She was the one that was going to be going to Cancun with Travis. She was not interested in him the way that he was with her. Mimi testified that Jody was stalking Travis, and she also talked about how Travis treated her. Kirk right away was like, I don't know why the state would have done this to present her as the first person on the stand. But he believed that this was actually going to be to Jody's advantage. The way Kirk lays out his thinking in this was basically that Travis had a lot to lose if his secret with Jody came out. Think about it. The church, his business, his family, friends, etc. Jody, on the other hand, if the secret ever came out, she didn't have that much to lose in comparison. So that's something to keep in mind as the trial unfolds, but Kirk very simply lays that out. So Detective Flores, he was the lead investigator. Kirk goes through what the lead investigator's role is in a case like this. It is that they are the ones that know the case, or are supposed to know the case inside and out, through and through, which, they're supposed to know all of the evidence. They're supposed to be the one that would have interviewed the witnesses and interrogate the accused. So again, know this case inside and out, everything to it. Usually they are the best witness for the state. Kirk felt in this case, however, he would be the best witness for the defense. So this is because of two recorded accounts that he gave before the trial started. One of them was in the first 48 hour CBS special. Detective Flores was interviewed in that, and he looked straight into the camera, and he called the murder of Travis Alexander a crime of rage and a crime of passion. He also said that Jody shot Travis first before she stabbed him. During Detective Flores' testimony during I knew I was going to butcher that word, preliminary hearing under oath, he testified that he spoke to Dr. Horn, the doctor who performed the autopsy, in advance of that hearing. And at the time, Dr. Horn told him that the gunshot wound preceded the stab wounds. But when Dr. Horn was called to the stand, he testified the gunshot wound came last. So Detective Flores was actually mistaken. Big difference, right? Big difference. And a critical part of what happened, right? So this, needless to say, would be something that Kirk would use to their advantage because it calls into question the credibility of the witness. So, and I will say my cat is on the tower right there, grooming very loudly. So if that's being picked up on the microphone, I am so sorry. But other than that, the door's open, so the cats will be coming in and out of the room. So hopefully you'll get to see one tonight. So again, his testimony would show the jury that Jody was her own worst enemy, a liar, and, quote, a master of the art of self-sabotage, end quote. What surprised Kirk was that the state broke up Detective Flores's testimony. So what that means is he would be called to the stand multiple times. So Kirk made a strategic note here that he was going to wait until the jury had more context to the case before calling him out on his inconsistencies with his statements in this case. So the forensics. The first part of the testimony concluded from Detective Flores. The state delivered to the court and jury the evidence that was collected at the crime scene. The state gained points with the jury by allowing them to see the horrors associated with Travis's death. And that means showing them not only pictures of the crime scene, but pictures of Travis from the murder that had occurred. Kirk hoped that the jury would see the chaos in these pictures, which would show Jody's actions were a split-second decision and not a premeditated planned attack like the state was trying to explain that they felt is what happened. So, Ryan Burns. If you're familiar with this case, you know exactly who he is. So he was called to the stand. So when he was called, that's when Kirk says in the book, things started to get bizarre in the trial. Ryan Burns, again, was Jody's former love interest, and he testified that while they were on their way to a business meeting, she got pulled over because her license plate was upside down. The state would later use this to say she did that to evade law enforcement. But to Kirk, that theory did not make any sense at all because that would actually draw the attention of police versus trying to go undetected. Ryan testified that she told him that she worked at Margaritaville, but it was actually a restaurant called Casa Ramos. Kirk felt Ryan might have been mistaken in this detail. Otherwise, he offered a fair amount of factual testimony. So, one of the things that this book it talks about is what everybody from this case talked about and focused on when the trial happened: the naked pictures. Kirk felt that these pictures spoke to the highly sexual relationship and spirit of that day between Jody and Travis. If she was an unwelcome visitor, a stalker, right? Would Travis have welcomed her into this home of his, and would he conduct the type of photography that they did? So that's one of the things that Kirk kind of questions here. We will get back to the photos later. So just briefly touching upon them now. In regards to the maybe she could, you know, that was very good timing on that. That was pretty good. I'll give you that. So in regards to the interrogation videos of Jody, Kirk did not think that those videos in regards to what happened after she admitted to killing Travis should have been allowed in the court for the jury to see. His reason for thinking that was because the content of that did not speak to the issue of whether or not Jody killed Travis in a premeditated fashion. In regards to the headstand, we've all seen that video of her doing the headstand. That was used to become more of an attack on her character. Kirk says, quote, I think you can see that saying that Mysterious did not help herself. Oh, wait, sorry, 1 second. I think you can see that saying that Mysterious did not help herself by lying during our conversations with Detective Flores is an understatement. More than not helping herself, Miss Arias' lies, her singing, and her gymnastics distracted the jury from the truth she shared during her interrogation. Her lies distracted the jury and the entire world from the seriousness of the questions and or facts that contradict the theory that this was a premeditated murder, end quote. Let's see. Wolf is saying the way that she changed her looks in court was captivating. Yes, and I would add to that how quickly she was able to change those looks. So not just the way that she did, but how quickly she did. And that is something that we are going to get to in the book, Wolf, is, her in the courtroom and her on the stand. So we will totally touch upon that. But you are absolutely right in this. Absolutely right. So in regards to Jodi calling Travis and leaving him voicemails, that was talked about because there was the theory of she was leaving those voicemails for him once she left his home after murdering him, as though he was alive after she killed him. And maybe this would be seen as uncaring. In some minds, it could be viewed as crazy and or evil. What was lost is that Jodi and Travis called each other on a constant basis. So again, there was the notion that Jodi was a stalker, but in going through the phone records, again, one thing can be true, another thing can be true, both things can be true, both things could be wrong. It wasn't just a one-sided thing. So Travis, again, was calling her just as much as she was calling him. So Mr. Mendez took the stand in the trial. He was working for and I know I'm going to totally butcher this word. It's spelled Siskiou. So Siskiyou County Sheriff's Office. My apologies. I know I was going to butcher that. So he was a good cop, and he stated only the facts while on the stand. He had been the one who was monitoring Jodi for Detective Flores a few days before her arrest to make sure that she did not flee. Once arrested, he collected evidence from Jodi's residence, which was at the time her grandparents' home. He spoke to the guy in Redding, California, the guy who rented the car to Jodi. Mr. Mendez discussed what he found in Jodi's car. That included gas receipts and fast food receipts. So the note here is that the state did not tell the defense that they would be doing this. And technically, you're supposed to disclose to the other side what you're going to be presenting. And a lot of the times here that Kirk will say, it's also professional courtesy. That was not done here. So he makes a point to let the reader know that was not done. Kirk talks about a few of those receipts and how he felt they were relevant. So in regards to the receipt for the rental car, so Jodi owned a car. She did not have to rent a car. This actually created a paper trail, as she would have had to give the rental agency her ID, her credit card, her car insurance information, so on and so forth. So that kind of didn't make sense, right? Kirk says to the reader, but did this make a strong case in support of her renting the car in the first place? And he says, no, it did not. The state made a point to say she chose to use a car rental agency from the Redding airport instead of Eureka, where she lived. There was one that was closer to her. The state says she purposely did that to avoid recognition by those who might have known her. But Kirk argues she had not lived in Eureka for years and most likely would not have been recognized. She also parked her car at her brother's place and had an acquaintance of his drive her to the airport to get the rental car. So Kirk saying this is now involving more people kind of being brought in who would actually be involved in this. So it wouldn't make sense if she was trying to go through these extra steps to kind of cover herself, right? So the car rental guy, y'all, the name, when I read this, I was like, am I reading this right? This is just too good to be true. So the car rental guy, Mr. Colombo, yes, Mr. Colombo. So he spoke about Jodi being offered a red car, and instead she wanted a white car. He says at the time she had blonde hair when she rented the car, and then after she had brown hair, was a brunette. So Kirk states that Jodi did have brown hair when she rented the car. She had already dyed over the blonde hair, and the pictures Travis took of Jodi when she was at his place also showed that she was a brunette at this time. So could Mr. Colombo have been mistaken? Most likely. On the drive, Jodi had also transferred money between her personal and business account. And Kirk makes it a point to say that would create a record, that would create a paper trail. If she was trying to be secretive, she could have easily just withdrawn cash and paid for things in cash along the way and not have used her cards or accessed her bank accounts where there'd be a record of that. So with that being said, Jodi also did have cash on her. She got gas, but she kept all those receipts. So again, if she was trying to not create a paper trail and kind of pay for things in cash as she went along, why then keep the receipts? That makes no sense, because if she didn't leave those, they wouldn't have been able to track all of the places that she had stops. So again, why leave a paper trail? The most damaging thing was that there was no receipts or bank activity while she was in Arizona. And Kirk argues this was while she was at Travis's home, so there would have been no need to make any type of purchases to use her accounts. So Lisa Perry, who's the Mesa Police Department, she had testified and gave testimony about the blood throughout the home. So again, the book goes a lot into that. Kirk talks about when he cross-examined her, he knew what he was up against, and particularly what the emotions would have been with the jury in regards to what happened to Travis. Because again, anybody who's familiar with this case knows what he went through was brutal. Brutal, brutal. Kirk took this opportunity to poke holes in the state's theory of the case about the blood on the shower walls, because the state actually did not test the shower walls. And there's quite a few things that it seems like the state did not test when they were examining this case, which again, we all know where the end result came, but going back to when they first discovered Travis was deceased and had been murdered, you would think, again, before they arrested Jodi, all of that stuff would be super critical to test, just to essentially have a slam dunk case, if you will. But they didn't. So Kirk, being the defense, was going to point that out. So at this point, Detective Flores was brought back onto the stand again, because again, he was being split up with his testimony. He played clips of Jodi from the police interviews and of her with Inside Edition, the interview that she did, telling them that no jury would ever convict her. So it was very clear what this was. She was challenging the jury. Kirk had tried to get this evidence excluded as part of the case, but had lost that battle. When Kirk confronted Detective Flores about the contradiction in his statements regarding that the gunshot came first, in Kirk's mind, Detective Flores would start falling on his sword, which is pretty much what he ended up doing. So the state did 9 days of testimony to prove their case to the jury. Kirk felt that this ended sooner than he had predicted that it would, and that he did not feel that the case that they made was that powerful. Again, we were dealing with a death penalty case. Since most of the witnesses for the defense that would be taking the stand lived out of state, this posed a little bit of an issue because, again, the state rested sooner. So what happened was the trial took a few days break in between the state ending their case and then the defense going to start theirs to the jury. So the defense in this time did not take a break, did not take a vacation, and took this time to put finishing touches on their case and dealing with any logistical issues that they had to do. Kirk describes that the defending, again, they don't need to testify. And that's something we talked about at the very beginning, right? The burden of proof is on the state. The defense does not need to say a thing. And we can all think of some cases where there have been times when the defense is set up and just said, we rest, and they don't put anything forward. Kind of rare, but we have seen that. And we've seen that in some high profile cases where it's like, what? But again, makes sense. So Kirk then goes through the various scenarios, what it would have been if Jodi were to testify versus if she were not to testify. Again, this was all things that he had to kind of weigh the pros and cons with his defendant. And Kirk broke down each point that the state made and his thoughts on how he felt the state made their point or didn't, and how they would then, as the defense, kind of attack that during their testimony. And based on this, it would be best for the defense to lay out their case. I have a note here that this was in, and it was chapter 14 specifically. My note is amazing chapter in this book, a must read, a must pay attention to every single point made. So, and I would say kind of, I was making that note as the book went along. I still stand by that this was one of my favorite chapters for this entire book. So, a few months before trial, when Jodi switched her theory, remember she had the ninja, oh my God, I can't even say it, ninja intruder theory in regards to what she was really hanging on to, but she switched. She switched to the self-defense theory. Now she stuck to that story. And every expert that he had speak with Jodi had to now kind of go with that theory. And Kirk had her actually take a lie detector test, and she passed. So there is a note here. The defense is always the client's defense. Kirk says, quote, "I was duty bound to proceed with this defense, her defense. This, the best I could do, was to attempt to craft my arguments in a way that distanced myself from it. To represent her competently, I needed to maintain credibility with the jury, and that would never happen if they thought I bought into the self-defense theory," end quote. Kirk's co-counsel, Jennifer Wilmot, Kirk says that she believed Jodi, at least enough with a genuine passion in that she was attempting to defend herself from a violent abuser. Capone is saying that's why she lost. The real ninjas are still out there. You know, stranger things have happened. Stranger things have happened. So, excuse me. Kirk says, quote, "In my opinion, Miss Arias is alive today because I discerned a way to save her life at my expense. I had nothing. The state had a royal flush. Yet the defense won twice. You're welcome, Miss Arias. Oh, wait, you never said thanks," end quote. I was like, Kirk is just like, again, different tone in this book. He does not hold back. Totally, and I'm loving it. I am loving in this book, Kirk, it's like he's just able to more unrestrictively speak his truth about this and just not have anything holding him back in this. Where I felt in the first book, it was, all right, let me get there, read it again. Understand, hey, I get why you thought this, but here's this. I understand why you thought this, but here's this. Here he doesn't do that. He doesn't do that. And I love it. I love it. Let's see. Dani, you inspired me to do more research into this case. It turns out there is new photos of Jodi. I had no idea. Oh, Jesus, James. You know, it's interesting what you take away from book reviews. That's why she lost a relationship. Oh, right. Yep, I already saw that. Okay. So the defense goal now that Kirk has kind of said where his position was going to be in presenting to the jury. So the defense goal was not to focus on the homicidal act, but instead to give context to what happened on June 4th, 2008, to offer alternative explanations of what had occurred, and that meant looking into the people involved in the entire situation. Kirk describes Dr. Horn's testimony, again, where he first said that the gunshot was the first wound, then switched it to the first wound inflicted was from a knife. In trying to prove first-degree premeditated murder, Kirk argued, why bring a loaded gun to kill someone and then overlook that and use a knife, which she would have had to bring to the intended victim. So that it just didn't make sense. And that's what Kirk is explaining here. So Dan Friedman and his sister Desiree Friedman, they took the stand for the defense. They were both model LDS church members. They were honest, kind people. Dan and Desiree had a unique level of insight into the relationship of Jodi and Travis. So Desiree testified that Travis frequently bragged about his virginity. Even when Travis and Jodi were affectionate in front of others, Desiree never questioned Travis that he was sexually active. Dan Friedman was a recruiter for the LDS Church to bring in new members. Kirk then describes what the process is for somebody to become Mormon and be baptized. So Dan Friedman had no idea that his friends were committing one of the most egregious offenses by LDS standards when Jodi was baptized into the church. He had no clue. So Lisa Andrews, she testifies she was one of Travis's ex-girlfriends. They dated while Travis was having sex with Jodi. They never became engaged, but they did discuss marriage. Lisa was a true Mormon. She started dating Travis when she was 19 years old and he was 29 years old. So in the email that she sent him, so she broke up with him and says that Travis frequently talked about sex, even when she asked him not to. He would grab her butt in public and she told him not to do that. The prosecution tried to flip it around and paint Lisa as the sexual aggressor in all of this. So 18 days of testimony is what we get to next. Jodi taking the stand on February 4th, 2013. And this is when, if the trial wasn't already kind of exploding everywhere in the media before that, this is when it just went completely unhinged into a pop culture sensationalism case. Before Kirk goes into the defense days in the trial, Kirk educates the reader on the Constitution, the 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendments. I found this as a reader extremely helpful because, again, it sets the reader up into, all right, before Jodi takes the stand, here is what the Constitution says. Here is what the Constitution says in my relation to it as a defense attorney, and making sure that my client's rights under the Constitution, under these amendments, are upheld. Super important. And it's also just really important outside of this case, but in regards to what any defense attorney's job is. So again, I found it amazingly helpful and very, very detailed. So the way Kirk kind of wraps that part up, again, it goes a lot into this book, is, quote, "The goal was to represent my client's constitutional rights to the absolute best of my ability," end quote. In this case, the goal was to get a life sentence instead of a death sentence. As we know from the first book, Jodi had a different idea. Her goal would have been just to walk out of the courtroom a free woman. That was never going to happen. Again, Kirk's goal to get a life sentence for her and not a death sentence. So Kirk knew that Juan Martinez, the prosecutor, would not be able to hold back his aggression and animosity towards Jodi during cross. He knew that, and we all saw it. Kirk was spot on. Spot on. And if anybody is kind of thinking back and being like, oh, I kind of vaguely remember it, you can find it. It's on YouTube. You can find it. And it is quite a watch to go back because, yeah, Juan just could not hold back. He could not hold back. And it was something where if you're going to watch it. Like, don't just kind of put it on your phone and walk away and listen. Oh, no. Mannerisms are so important. Watch it, listen. Super important. So, what Kirk needed was the jury to hear everything. not just what happened on June 4th, 2008. The jury needed to form a connection with Jodi. This meant that they had to learn about her childhood, being influenced by others during her impressionable years. He knew that they wanted to hear about June 4th, 2008, and that everything else would be boring. So what Kirk did was made the conscious choice to start right away on June 4th, 2008. And I made a note here. A lot was discussed about what Jodi testified on the stand, because she was on the stand for quite a bit. And Kirk talks about all of that in the book. Jodi talked about, just to kind of put some bullet points to it, how she was disciplined growing up, how her mom would hit her with a wooden spoon, her father would beat her with a belt. She said her father would push her into furniture and choke her to the point of unconsciousness. Kirk knew that for the jury to spare Jodi's life, they needed to see that she had also a history of bizarre and or destructive behavior with prior relationships. So, one of the long-term prior boyfriends was Daryl Brewer. He was the one that Jodi was with for quite a while, and he had the child. They had worked together, and they actually shared a home. They stayed friends after the breakup, even after her arrest, which is like wild. Kirk reviewed his testimony on the stand. He says she was a great girlfriend, she wasn't jealous, and she was a positive influence on his son. Now, let's jump back a little bit more to Jodi herself. So Kirk talks about how Jodi's image was so important to her at all times, right? During the trial, she was preoccupied with dressing nicely, upholding her well-dressed, innocent victim image. Kirk was like, I was never there to defend her reputation. I was there to save her life. Quote, and ultimately, it was this core distinction that was at the heart of all of her troubles with me, end quote. So Kirk's default position that everything Jodi said was untruthful until he found objective verification from her assertions. He says, quote, tears are Miss Arias's last resort, her Hail Mary. If she can't use sex, guilt, intimidation, or lies, eventually she will resort to tears. And so it came as no shock to me that she would deploy her weapon of choice during her defense in her quest to protect her image. The image of a well-dressed, innocent victim. The image she thought she was projecting, end quote. So spot on. That quote is so spot on. So Kirk talks about when he met with Jodi in jail, she would disagree with Kirk and she would try to pull all of her usual tricks and it wouldn't work. She would cry. That didn't work. So she decided just to sit there and not speak. So he just got up and left. She would later use this in her complaints about him, saying that he was, quote, chauvinistic, end quote. Maybe in retrospect, a Phoenix News Time article would later kind of comment on it. And he says in this article, quote, maybe in retrospect, I was her other victim, end quote. My note here is, oh my God, so true. He absolutely was. Kirk absolutely was. Well, let's see. Wolf is seeing the photos and the gas cans that she tried to cover her route was a slam dunk. It seems like, I mean, yeah. And again, she kept all the receipts for her stops when she paid with gas. So it's like, were you really covering? Yeah, but a lot of evidence. So Kirk says he crafted his closing argument in the most objective way possible to connect with the jury, given their obvious disdain for Jodi. Quote, and this is the quote we've all heard. It's not even about whether or not you like Jodi Arias. 9 days out of 10, I don't like Jodi Arias, end quote. So Juan Martinez objected to that statement. The judge sustained it and told the jury to disregard it. But the media latched onto it. And that's one of those quotes we all know from the trial. So Kirk then reviews the main points he made in his closing arguments, once that statement was out there. So he pointed out to the holes in the state's theory: the theft of the gun, that was Jody's grandparents, the rental of the car, visiting her former boyfriends Daryl and Matt, using her bank, doing transactions, which led to a paper trail. Even though she had enough cash, she did not have to touch her bank card, as well as what occurred between Jody and Travis when she arrived at his home before killing him. So, again, he pointed to all of those things. Outside of the courthouse, things were like a circus. He says there were tons of media, news, people with signs, and there was a pretty much similar theme, and that was everybody hated Jody. When they were brought in for the verdict, the tone that Kirk says, what Jody appeared to be calm. In hindsight, Kirk says in this book, I now know why. She had been secretly arranging an on-camera interview with Troy Hayden, a reporter with the local Fox affiliate in Phoenix. So she was focused on the interview more than the actual verdict. He says, quote, Miss Arias will not accept responsibility for the part she plays in the bad things that happened to her. In her mind, Mr. Alexander's death was his fault. Likewise, if the verdict was not to her liking, the failure rested with me. It was my responsibility. And if I had failed to garner her a favorable verdict, placing the blame squarely on my shoulders as soon as possible was of premium importance to her, end quote. Again, spot on. Like, Kirk is just spot on. So Kirk says he only learned about the interview when a member of the defense team saw it on the news and brought it to his attention. Like, oh my God. Like, my literal note is OMG. Like, oh my God. So the interview with Mr. Hayden. Again, a lot of people have already seen this or have heard of it from when the trial happened, and then she gave that interview after. Jody was the one that reached out to him. She used a friend to ensure the lines of communication remained open. So Jody's statement about preferring a sentence of death because otherwise she would not live she didn't want to live a long, unhappy life in prison. That is what she said in that interview. She would prefer a death sentence, right? So, let's see. I thought a male juror might sympathize with her or something like that. Wasn't sure. Good point. I mean, she manipulates men left and right. So that is a very good point. Hey, Zach. All right. So imagine Kirk learning that she's giving this interview and saying she would prefer a death sentence. He says it was a total slap in the face to the entire defense team. All of the work that they did to keep her off death row. She was found guilty. Then there had to be a separate trial, if you will, for what the sentence for that would be. And here she is saying, I prefer death. All of that work that they did. I'm not ignoring you. Hi, Tony. How you doing, hon? So, yeah, you're talking sports. So, like, I which is great for you. I just, not my cup of tea. So, he says, Jody was, quote, the boss, end quote, of the entire defense team. And basically, she felt that Kirk did not do all that he could to find witnesses that would corroborate her story of abuse from Travis. The thing is, Kirk talks about the people that Jody said, hey, interview these people. They will be witnesses for me. And he says that he would not call Jody's sister to provide an alibi for that period that the gun was stolen from her grandparents' house. Because again, her sister was little. Jody also stated that Kirk, not her, wanted to condemn Travis's character. So again, she's not taking the blame in the way that Travis was portrayed on the stand. She's now saying, oh no, that was all Kirk. That was all my defense attorney. That was him, not me. Which, I mean, again, a part of me wants to say that's so obvious, but based on the amount of people that left that trial hating Kirk, thinking he believed and supported everything Jody said and did, maybe it wasn't that obvious. I don't know. To me, it was pretty clear that, like, well, yeah, it was Jody, not him. So the defense team at this point, even though Jody was found guilty, they were starting to receive threats. Threats were also being made against the witnesses in the trial, and people of the media had also had threats made against them too. One of the more well-known people from the media that had a threat made against them, and it talks about in the book, Nancy Grace. So when Kirk talks about Jody during what she told the court during her allocation. So we all remember this. The domestic survivor t-shirts. So Kirk says, and this I did not know, he says he was not aware that she was going to do that. He says, quote, I was stunned, I was appalled, end quote. He also says, quote, it never occurred to me that she would take the opportunity afforded to her to plead for her life to sell t-shirts, end quote. Which I take a step back as a reader and I'm thinking he had worked with her for years at this point leading up to this trial. He knew her pretty well. And for him to be like stunned and appalled and just totally off guard by something she did, like she just, it never ends. It never, ever ends. But I didn't know that he didn't know she was going to do that. I think I just, again, thought she was doing what she was going to do. And he's just like, you know, as my client, it is your amendment right to say, like, I can't stop you from doing this. I didn't realize he didn't know she was going to do it. And I was like, oh, I'm like literally reading it. And I was like, oh shit. So worth a try. So at this point, Jody didn't just stop. She did more interviews. Again, we can all find these now. A lot of these we've already seen. So what Kirk discusses from this is Ryan Owens for Good Morning America and a local reporter, Amy Murphy. So Jody called Ryan Owens a hater. She also gleefully talked about her assertions about Travis. And when Amy Murphy interviewed Jody, she asked the question a lot of other reporters hadn't been asking her was, quote, why are you doing these interviews? End quote. And Jody, in true Jody form, said, quote, my agenda at this point is to bring attention to domestic violence, end quote. Jody wanted her legacy to be that of a cautionary tale for these women who are experiencing domestic violence in their life. Kirk's response to this in the book was simple. It just said, quote, wow, end quote. Like those are like the moments where I'm just like, Kirk, yes. Like, yes, I am right there with you. And I love it. Because he's just like, he does not hold back in this book in the way I thought he did in the first. So I'm like, love it, love it, love it. I just like, I'm all for it. I'm all for it. So So the first jury, as we know, it was a hung jury. Before they announced that they were a hung jury, Kirk did not think they were going to sentence Jodi to death. But again, hung jury. So now with the hung jury, the penalty phase of this would have to occur again. Kirk talks about his life had been on hold for several years with this case, and he was looking forward to the trial ending, a penalty phase being over with, and he could move on and rid himself of this. But now the penalty phase had to occur again. So he was still trapped with Miss Arias. So the state was now intending to take another shot at the death penalty against Jodi. They could have opted not to do that, but we all know they were not going to not take that chance. So with that being said, there was going to now be another penalty phase. Kirk said he now had to find new professional experts for this case, which was hard to do because the last ones were threatened. Again, there were so many people that were threatened in this case. But he says he did find two, and they were actually good for the defense. Kirk was now afraid people wanting to be in the new jury could be there for the wrong reasons. Were they already familiar with a lot of the case, where they would be biased towards kind of really being an impartial juror in regards to sentencing? Were they there for 15 minutes of fame? Who knows? But that was a concern of his, and that makes complete and total sense. Complete and total sense. So the trouble with finding a new jury was, again, they had to make sure they found someone who were not aware of everything from the first trial. How is that going to happen? Because this case was such a media frenzy. So to find a whole jury that didn't know about it was going to be really, really difficult. So Kirk says he tried to create a bubble of his home and of his family. And he tried to set this thing now where once he got home, there was no talk about Jodi, no talking to his wife or friends about it. And with that being said, he tried as best he could. He describes one night he was out to dinner with his wife, and when they were leaving, a girl recognized him and asked for a photo. He politely declined, and he says he was never interested in being any type of celebrity. He had begun to realize that even if his cancer was cured, because we talk about that in the book here, that he got diagnosed with stage 3 cancer, he's like, my obituary would still read, quote, Jodi Arias' defense attorney, dead at 110 years old, end quote, or whatnot. And he knew that. And that really sucks. Like, that really, really sucks, because he has his whole life, this whole career, different, he's had different types of jobs that we just talked about in the first book, not just this. And he has his personal life, his family, his friends, my favorite, his pets. But that one sliver of time is what he's always going to be known for. Jodi Arias' defense attorney. And he knows that and realizes that. And it's not a good thing. Like, it sucks. Like, it really, really sucks. And when I read that, like, that statement that he made, I just felt like such profound sadness for him when I read that. Because I'm like, that's not fair. He has a whole life, and we're judging it on this one thing. And we're knowing him by this, or thinking we're knowing him. That's the best way to put it. Thinking we know him by this one thing. And it just sucks. It just totally sucks. I just felt really saddened by that. So Kirk now is still working with Jodi, but she was now giving him the silent treatment. She was refusing his jailhouse visits. So what Kirk would do would bring another member of the defense team. And Jodi is just like so immature. Like, It's insulting. Like, come on. Like, it's just insulting. She would talk to the other teammate of the defense and just ignore Kirk. But in the end, there was, work had to be done. Sometime before the resentencing, she did start to talk to him again, but her disdain for him was at full force at this point. She would say to him, quote, "I deserve a lawyer who believes in me," end quote. It was clear going into the second sentencing phase that Jodi viewed Kirk as an incompetent attorney who failed to set her free. She had expected, and this was something we talked about in this book and especially in last book, she expected to just be acquitted of the crime and just walk out of court. And that was never going to happen. So what happens now? They go through another penalty sentencing phase. The jury was hung again. So now her sentence would be up to the courts. And the question would be, would the judge sentence Jodi to natural life or life with the possibility of parole? Kirk says he knew the judge would sentence Jodi to natural life. So now we go to tax day 2015. Kirk's motion to withdraw from the Jodi Arias case was finally granted. So her case was no longer his obligation. And hallelujah. He took months off to spend time with his wife, to travel. And he talks about the kind of love and just passion he had for practicing law. It just wasn't there anymore. And after a few months, he realized it still just wasn't there at all. However, what came to him at this time instead was cancer. So again, we talked about it briefly in the book, but it was also discussed on the back cover of the case. Was at this point, Kirk was diagnosed with stage 3 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Kirk chose to go public with the diagnosis. Some were supportive of him, and some said it was his karma. And I just get so, when I was reading that, I was just so outraged because I'm like, who would literally say to another human being, yeah, your cancer is your karma? Who would do that? It blows my mind. And especially in this case, again, I don't understand how some people can't separate that Kirk is just a defense attorney doing his job. And if he didn't do his job, there would have been so many opportunities where Jodi could have basically won an appeal and there would have to be a whole new trial. So that was kind of the juxtaposition that Kirk was facing with representing Jodi. If he just kind of didn't allow X, Y, and Z to happen, she could get a new trial. So it's like, what do you do? What do you do? He was only doing his job. The hate he got from it, people saying it was karma that he got cancer, it blows my mind. Blows my mind. But it's what happened, and it sucks. It really sucks. So he says he was going to beat this, but he realized not everybody does win that battle, again, of stage 3 cancer. Not nice at all. Right, Wolf? Totally. So now we get into the book of, quote, the cult of Jodi, end quote. There is a cult of Jodi. They have a shared belief that she suffered an injustice. And Kirk describes, for those interested, what does it mean to be in the cult? You have to have some sort of delusional belief that Jodi didn't kill Travis, or some unfounded theory that she acted in self-defense. Blame her conviction on Kirk Nurmi, and donate money to Jodi's appellate fund. Appellate. Did I just say appellate? I think I did. Appellate fund. It is definitely go towards the end of the week, folks. Her appellate fund. Oh my gosh, do it again. So once this cult of Jodi was going strong. He saw one post online from this cult, and it said that Travis was actually alive. He wasn't murdered, he was alive, and he was in the witness protection program. I think we can just all kind of agree silently and move on that one. Yeah. Appellate intrude us. Zach, hey now. She's guilty as sin. Yeah. Yeah, what a theory. I had to stop and reread that. I'm like, really? Really? Okay. So Jodi was also able to maintain a Twitter account online via a designated proxy that was posting on her behalf. She also sells artwork online, and my note on that is still. So he put that in the book, and I had heard about it on, I forget what podcast that was covering this case, and it mentioned that she sells art online, and I'm like, still? And I'd never realized. I looked it up. I will not be saying what the website is, and I will not be posting what the website is because I do not want anybody to go there and buy anything from there. But yeah, no, she does still to this day sell art online. And when I say art, to me, then again, I guess art is anything can be artistic. I get it, but it wasn't here's these one-of-a-kind pieces for you. It was just anybody can buy print A, print B, print C, print D. So it's okay, are you just getting an image and just then drawing 20 of the same thing? I don't know. Either way, folks, don't. So we're kind of winding things down here in the book. So Kirk shares in this book some of the hate emails and letters that he received. Again, it's just I just shake my head. And when I was reading it, on the one hand, I get his intent to put it in there, but I'm when I was reading it, I was getting mad on his behalf reading it. I'm just what the hell? What the hell? But Kirk says, they didn't bother him. He was numb to it. He would just look at all of these hate emails and letters just to make sure that there weren't any real serious threats. So now Kirk talks about why write the book? Why write this book, right? He says with mortality in view, being diagnosed with cancer, he wanted to set the record straight from all of her lies. So Jodi's appellate attorneys wrote Kirk a letter threatening to file a complaint if the book was not pulled off Amazon. Because remember, he was able to walk away after the court did their sentencing of her. But she, it's within her rights to try to appeal and all of that stuff. So she has new appellate attorneys. So, yeah, I thought that was interesting. They wrote him a letter threatening to file a complaint, and he completely ignored it. The Bar Association, however, got wind of the book when one article said it was, quote, a tell-all, end quote. So they asked Kurt for an explanation. And Jodi, again, just being let me jump on the bandwagon, made accusations against Kirk. And he lists all of that in the book. When Kirk says he was done being attorney after the trial, after the months passed, he never got that passion back. We talked about that a little bit earlier. So when the state bar sought sanctions against him, he was just I'm not fighting back. I'm done. I'm just done. And he says about that, quote, with disbarment came freedom, end quote. And again, as a reader, when I read that, I was just, on the one hand, him saying he finally felt free. I was happy for him that he finally got that just peace and solitude of being I'm just done with this part of my life. But again, I also felt anger, on his behalf for all this bullshit that he had to go through. And then when it was done, and he's like, I'm telling my truth, and then to still be attacked. Like, I just felt angry for that. And there are a lot of examples in this book and in the first one where there's things he's like, by law, by attorney client privilege, I can't discuss X, Y, and Z. So this whole image of like a tell-all, like anybody who watched the trial, who listened to her interviews, like none of this is going to be shocking. Like, I don't see how someone could read this and be like, oh my God, like, but then again, there's a whole cult of Jody who feel a certain way. And one of their theories that Travis is actually still alive. So I don't know. But in the end, again, as a reader, I'm like, I'm angry because like this, he shouldn't have had to deal with the bullshit, but he's having freedom now from being out of practicing law. So I'm like, okay, if he's happy like that as a reader, I'm like, okay. Because like you really feel, at least for myself, felt a connection with him reading this book. And especially like when he gets really into the emotional part of and personal part of like his cancer diagnosis and dealing with all of this and being threatened, and like you feel a connection to him. So that's kind of where I was. Let's see. Just a couple more points. Okay. So, in true Jody fashion, she did not want Kirk to have his freedom. So she filed a lawsuit against him. He says, quote, nothing would stop her from seeking vengeance, end quote. So Jody, again, within her rights, had filed an appeal. Her appeal was denied. Kirk, in one of the later, like very later chapters towards the end of the book, he kind of just reviews of what the trial was like in the media circus, was kind of looking back in hindsight. And I found that actually very interesting because to be in it, like Kirk even says, like, no one really knew who I was prior to this. And then the trial happened and everybody now knew who he was, wanted to know who he was, would make up stories about who he was. So it's like he was in it for so long. And then with so much time passing and for him to kind of look back at it, I found that very interesting, like a very interesting read to kind of see that. Kirk says he now defines himself, does things on his own terms, and is now happy. And then lastly, he gives his theory on what he feels happened to Travis Alexander. He gives a very detailed account. Obviously, we talked a little bit about what he thought happened last month in book review for part 1 of the book. Once the trial and everything happened and kind of re-looking at everything in hindsight, he has a different theory. And what that theory is, read the book to find out. I'm not going to tell you, read the book to find out, but it's a very interesting theory. And it's not just like, here's my theory in a paragraph. No. It is well laid out and well detailed. So if you want to know, read the book. So he answers the question, what is she like? He says, quote, she is nothing, end quote. In regards to why that is his answer, read the book to hear his explanation. He leaves at the end of the book 2 chapters. One is called Dear Travis, and the other one is called Dear Miss Arias. I won't read anything from that because I wouldn't be able to do it any form of justice. So what I will say is the chapter written to Travis, it is touching and emotional, and he sees similarities in seeing sides of Jody and being her victim as well. In regards to his letter to, or his chapter, Dear Miss Arias, it is very vulnerable, very raw. He does not hold back. And I loved that. So that is my overall thought, or overall takeaways, I should say, from each chapter. Just a couple of notes just to kind of sum it up. And these were things I kind of talked about as the review went on. I thought it was an excellent read. And not only that, it's a must read. Definitely get the first book, part 1, and then this, which is parts 2 and 3. Again, this has a different tone than it did from the last book. And I'm really thankful for that. That Kirk was just able to be like, all right, I'm just putting this out in like, here it is. So we also, with this book, really got to see how this case impacted Kirk's life, not just professionally, but personally, in regards to his family, in regards to his privacy anymore, especially in regards to his health, right? So we got to know Kirk a bit more from that perspective on his terms now, instead of what the media was putting out about him during the trial. He's talked about himself on his own terms, in his own truth. The defense perspective. My note here, I hope everyone realizes the defense's role and how what he did and what he had to do to save his client's life. Also, he had to work with Jodi. And any claim that she had, any story that she changed, think of what he had to work with and what he was up against. I think what he did was amazing. He saved her life. He did his job. He saved her life. And then I still can't get over, and my note here, I can't get over, I literally put, I cannot get over when they walked out of that courthouse and he had to learn that she's on TV doing an interview saying, give me the death sentence, give me a death penalty. Holy shit. Like, my God. I liked that he was able to talk about how he moved on from this case, that he's happy now. And he's really come a long way in his career from leaving this in the past. I'm so impressed by Kirk as a person coming out of this the way he did. Putting the health, the health aspect of what he went through aside, he could have really, how do I put this? He took a lot of hell from this, and it could have really changed him in a not so good way. But if you follow, he's on Instagram, Facebook, you can follow him there. He's just, honestly, every post I see from him, I'm just like, he is living his best life. And it's like time is just getting better and better for him. And I love that. I'm just in awe of him and the work he did for this and what he's continued to do after. So that is my overall long explanation. We're just under an hour and a half in review of this book, Trapped with Miss Arias, parts 2 and 3, My Final Words by Kirk Nurmi. So let's see if you guys have any, no spoilers. Yes, that came from when I covered this case, like, 2 years ago, maybe more. And I did a collab with that with Paul. And I totally mispronounced intruders. And I said ninja intruders. So yeah, that's where that comes from. He did go through a lot, Wolf, and he talks about that in the book. He went through a lot. Like, I only just briefly touched upon it, but oh my gosh, he could have easily, and who would have faulted him if he just suffered even just mentally more than he did. But no, he really, I'm so happy to see where Kirk is in his life now. So thank you, Zach. I appreciate that. I really do. So yeah, that is the overall review for the October book club book review. If anybody has any questions or comments on it, please leave a comment in the video comment section after this is live. If anybody else has read this and has a different takeaway, or if there's something that really stuck with you, please let me know. I would love to discuss this. Also, next month, I can't believe November is right around the corner. I'll put up a poll and list a few books and when a deadline will be for us to vote for that. So stay tuned for that. That will be coming soon. In regards to what I mentioned at the very, very beginning, I just want to read it again. So if anybody came in late, so I tagged Kirk in this review, and he had said, he's pulling it up here. Okay. Kirk says, if you would be so kind, could you please express my gratitude to everyone in your audience that took the time to read my books? I am truly honored. So, I am truly honored to, just have the opportunity to even have received that message with Kirk. So, everybody pick up this book. It's a must read. So, thank you, Wolf. I appreciate that. All right, everybody, that is that for tonight. Please enjoy the rest of your evening and the rest of your weekend. And remember, until next time, everyone, we don't live in darkness. Darkness lives in us. Bye, everyone.